pray. Lord, we ask for your blessings on our time. We thank who has been extraordinarily gifted and to now in a time truly of his golden years, the fading of his life on the landscape of the living. He's giving it all that he has, and his mind is engaged. And he's seeing things that we now get to appreciate, that for him were deeply disturbing. So bless us as we look into this. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'll try to go slow in terms of bringing detail to the scriptures right now. It's fairly deep. I think that with regard to chapter 10, that was much more simple because the entire breakdown of 10 was spiritual warfare. So let me just highlight this. The spiritual warfare on earth and in the heavens is seen, and that's why 11 is important right now, because we're going to get a repeat of history, but it'll have a little bit more definition to it. It's seen in the battles of the empires, okay? Empires rising and falling, rising and falling. I don't know if you are aware of this, but there's controversy stirring in Russia right now related to what is seen by the general populace as an effort by Putin to remain in his presidency. You know, they moved into a format of democracy, voting, and we've seen Putin just kind of manipulate himself in election after election. He had a proxy at one time who was in place for about 2 years, but he was kind of just a puppet, just to appease the people. He brought somebody in. I think that his name was Medvedev. I don't remember his first name. That if he was ever allowed to share what his tenure was as president of Russia, he would say, it was nothing. I was controlled by Putin. And so one of the things that Putin is doing right now on the persuasive part of culture is he's espousing God. He wants to bring back the fear and reverence of God to his nation and to the world. And then he wants to, and I don't at all contradict him on this, but he in essence is saying in the institution of marriage and to remove what he is rightfully calling as a blasphemy of marriage, and that is same-sex marriage. He's saying that one needs not to be endorsed. So what I'm saying is he's moving right down the line of, on one sense, trying to bring back a morality, and then the other side trying to be engaging people in a high sense of spirituality. So this, in essence, will be one of the challenges that Antichrist will have to resolve. Spirituality that has run in the form of blasphemy and cultural compromise that in itself will have consequences, not yet fully seen, but it is starting to happen. So Russia is going to have a playbook in the end times, and it's going to be interesting to see how Putin begins to give us kind of that indication. For your facts, because I know that one of the things that tends to get lost here is on the statue that we saw, Rome. When did they come into play? So it's important to kind of anchor them right now as we're dipping back preceding Rome in the history of empires. So Rome's rule, technically, though they were on the scene and will at the same time be longer on the scene, but as an influential empire, 27 BC to 476 AD. Now this is what you'd call their strongest impact as a world empire. And the reason that I'm saying that is because this character that we have talked about and will today talk about Antiochus Epiphanes, his reign's going to be at 175 BC. 175 BC. So he's well in advance right now of when the Romans will take power, okay? And his rule is going to be up to 164 BC. So the math is simply this. That's about 137 years before Rome flexes its muscle. Okay? The legs of Rome. Now, the other thing that we've talked about is that when you get down to the feet of that statue that was seen by Daniel and interpreted, we're not there, but we did talk about what's called the revised or Neo-Roman Empire, the New Roman Empire. And that's where this guy named Antichrist, that's what we call him, he'll actually have a name, will begin to have his influence in that order. So again, right now, headlines, Putin's trying to come across as a statesman, as kind of a religious guy now. Oh yeah, I want to bring back the fear of God. We need to bring back the fear of God. We need to get our culture morally stable again. And so, those are his two statements right now. And the general populace of Russia is going, hey, you've been in too long. This was an election and you only had 4 years. You're going on number 6. You know, so what he's trying to do is to amend basically their democracy. He's trying to put in his own little plan of staying. Now, whenever there's a move of a president to stay longer than what their constitution affords, it moves itself into what we would call a dictatorship or monarchy. Okay, so here's the other point that I want to make right now, okay? I think it's important for your notes. From verses 1 of this chapter to verse 35. From verse 1 to verse 35 will cover 365 years of time. The reason that that's important is because up to 35, and I'll do the counting for you, chapter 11 closes at 45, which means from verses 36 through 45 is going to be about Antichrist. The similarities are so close that for some commentators, they see Antiochus Epiphanes within the entirety of chapter 11. I'm not going to dispute it, because Antiochus Epiphanes is a foreshadow ultimately of Antichrist. So whenever there is what we would call the foreshadowing of an event yet to come or a person yet to be, it's meant to have a similarity that's striking, something that goes, how can that be? When we were walking through one of the stores the other day, wherever we were at, I saw a guy and he said, hey, Spencer, Zachary, Christy, look at this guy. He's a doppelganger of Mark Saunders. Now, I honestly don't, I've only used that word because it's doppelganger means basically a twin from another planet, whatever. And I saw this guy, he looked like one of my former youth ministers. And I'm very comfortable meeting people. I'm very comfortable, hey, can I get a photo? And so I was ready to do that, and all the kids jumped me in aisle 13 or something and held me back. They stuffed a candy bar in my mouth and said, easy, don't embarrass yourself, you're a foreigner. Don't take us down with it. But this guy was so close. I wanted his photo. I actually, once I broke the gang off, I threatened them with the Shamu, which is it's my life-saving wrestling move. It's where I throw myself and I have to get just a little bit of height, but then I throw all of my 200 pounds on them, and when they start turning blue, I've won. And I just walk away from the event. I'm not exactly 200 pounds more, but these guys are also bigger, so it doesn't work anymore. But I honestly ran out there to find this guy. So the idea there is, that's what I'm saying. When you see something that is so close to it being the real thing, your experience, it excites you. In the same way, God's allowing this to excite us. Now, we can say, what's so exciting about Antiochus Epiphanes? Sounds like a bad guy. And Antichrist isn't exactly getting score points for being nice. That is true. To that degree, that similarity is frightening. Most of us would not jump up and down if all of a sudden Hitler, in personification as we have seen him, all of a sudden is walking down the streets. And everything about the guy we see walking down the streets epitomizes or represents Hitler. We would be aghast. Okay? But God is trying to excite the believers of our day with ultimately the precision of his word that is already transacted. Remember, Daniel sees things that are not yet evident. That takes a lot of faith, by the way. In the gifting of prophecy, it means you're going to speak the word of God, and you may not see it, but you have to believe it in what it is you share. That's why even where I honestly shared with you at a conference, which was flowing in beautiful prophecy, I felt that I was to engage with it and share, but fear conquered my faith, and I left just really defeated. Because the word may have been for somebody that needed a time, whether it was a husband, whether it was a wife, pastors in general, the church, in components of who I was with, left completely dejected because I couldn't carry myself beyond my doubts. And my stomach still kind of turns because of it. And if Daniel had been that way, we wouldn't have this magnificent book if he would have shirked his responsibility. So that's what I'm saying right now about chapter 11, is that the redundancy to it is God saying in kind of a different format, this is actually, for you and I, happened. And when you get to 36 to the close in 45, this is going to happen. Mark my word. Essentially, what Daniel said has come to pass. What Daniel says in 36 through 45 will happen. Be ready. And that is Antichrist. So when we get to that part 2, it's not part 2, nor is it part 1. When we get to that part 2, T-O-O. When we get to that part also as well, it's important to understand with faith and enthusiasm, where are we going to be? See, that's why it's not going to be, per se, the doppelganger for you and I. You're not going to see, per se, Hitler again. What you're going to see is the face of God as we are taken from that point. When 36 through 45 hit, we will not be here. How do you get comforted in the scriptures? With relating to that. Revelation will encourage us. Let's go. Let's pen as many of these details as you want. If not, then get the tape later. But spiritual warfare is real. God wants us to be ready for it. And God's chosen to demonstrate it through the appearance of both Michael, of Gabriel, concerning one man's clarity, even the Lord personifying himself before Daniel. Empires represent ultimately the fulfillment of biblical history. In verse 1, and I'll get going right now on it. Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Again, Darius and Cyrus are mentioned in duality. Co-regents, one may be subordinate to the other, probably if so, it would be Darius. Cyrus having a larger chunk of the kingdom, but it seems that they worked things out. So we're being brought back into this for a historical data point, or where at times on your camera it marks the date, and in print, that's what this is. It's a date in print. Daniel is letting us know, through obviously the inspiration of the Spirit, this is how I am, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm saying. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia. It's not that he has lied to us. He's saying, pay attention. This is a truthful statement. It'll help you to remain anchored in what has been revealed. So, because that's what it basically says, to confirm and strengthen him. So what's going on with Darius right now? That indicates that that's the purpose right now of what Daniel's doing, because this guy's overseeing a huge empire. And something about his oversight of the empire is concerning him, which is what happens when all of a sudden your empire begins to fall and fold and there's tensions. You begin to do things, and one of those things is to worry. Nebuchadnezzar is. It seems that Darius is right now. Any situation that begins to overwhelm you can only be addressed, and that's what's saying right now, in a time of being strengthened, in this case, in the Lord. And that's what Daniel represents, a person who can strengthen him in the Lord. Confirm to him the evidence of the Lord. So that's where your strength comes from. That's where Darius' strength is coming from. Telling you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia. So we know that basically the country again, it's Persia. Not the Medes, but the Persian area. They're linked. They're very distinct. And the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. We're not in Antichrist's pictorial yet. This is just documenting what's going to unfold. So this is what we know, and you can pen it as cleverly as you want to. The 3 kings come on the scene. These are those kings. Cambyses, Cambyses, and his influence will be from 529 BC to 523 BC. The next one, in order of how they come on the scene, is Gamata, Gamata, and he, interesting enough, on the political evaluation, is noted as an imposter. So that's important because many will arise in the latter days declaring themselves to be what? King. Or if you would, Jesus Christ. And they're imposters. So there is a little bit of a picture in this. I don't know if you knew this. So at any rate, the years for him, very short. 523 to, here we go, 522. That's all that imposter lasted. Now, I don't know if you knew this, but trying to get my nations right, pretty confident he's Japanese. But he links himself to being a Christian, and unfortunately, in his linking himself to be a Christian, he's also a cult leader, and he considers himself to be Jesus Christ. Yep, one of those guys again. Just was in the news. And it shows him prostrated before a cabinet meeting, probably the Democratic Congress of Japan. And he's bowing, and he's confessing that the origins of the coronavirus came from one of his people. And you kind of wonder, well, if he was Jesus, he could have stopped that one pretty quickly. You know, that wouldn't exactly be one of his testimonies about how disease came out from one of his people. But I'm just sharing with you that, you know, between Putin and this guy from Japan who literally declares himself to be, and you remember Sun Myung-moon? Do you remember him? Anybody from Korea, North Korea? Sun Myung-moon? No? Alrighty, so you work in your Michael W. Smith thing, and then Sun Myung-moon, they were called the Moonies. They would dress themselves in orange, and don't remember that? And okay, so at any rate, But they had a technique for getting money for their ministry, and they would sell you things. Usually at airports, they would just converge on you, or sometimes they move into areas in states and around blocks, and they have these inconspicuous vans, and they come out with stuff that you go, oh great, Amazon's kind of been disappointing me lately. They haven't been making my 2-day deadline. So you guys showed up right on time, and you buy spoons and silverware and cups and so forth, and they make their money that way. But anyway, Reverend Sun Myung Moon, you can look him up, declared himself to be what? The second coming of Messiah. He was Jesus. I can tell you he died just recently. And you're just going, where do these guys come across this way? Well, that's what Daniel's explaining right now. And the more that you see of them, guess what it does? Here's what it does. It numbs people to the reality that, no, Jesus is coming, the church will be taken out. And everybody goes, yeah, heard it, been there, done that before. Putin, yeah, we know, he's probably Antichrist, woo, you know. And so Sun Myung Moon, these different peoples, these personifications of the Messiah, and it numbs people. They don't care anymore. As I shared with you the other day, somebody in the news who is a pastor and who boasts in his spiritual giftings is saying the Lord told him the coronavirus will exact no more lives. It's going away. So I read in the reports, 3 more cases showed themselves up in Maryland. So Maryland hasn't been mentioned yet. And the death toll continues to increase. Well, this guy just told me that the Lord said that it no longer will be affecting people. It's going away. And so he either stands to embarrass himself and to cause there to be, if you would, a laughability towards the Christian community, especially in this area of the giftings of prophecy. Don't know, but why don't you just keep that one to yourself and transfer it over to a song that truly can exalt God without bias. So, but telling us the truth against the realm of Greece, and this is where this 4th man is known as Darius the Great. Now we've been only introduced to Darius, not necessarily the Great, which means this guy's coming on the scene. 522 to 485. So usually guys that had shared the same name, they would try to outdo it by a title next to it. And so this is Darius the Great. It's like there was Richard the Lion-Hearted. And so how could you outdo Richard the Lion-Hearted? You know, you'd probably say, well, I'm going to be Richard the Great. Richard the Greatest. Richard the exceedingly awesomest greatest man. And that's the way that they would outdo themselves. So this particular one is the 4th that's coming. Excuse me, he's the 3rd, but the 4th right now is what we're referring to. And this is, and I'll spell his name as the rendering is best given to us historically. But the strength is in his riches, and this is Xerxes. So Xerxes, and his reign was from 485 to 464 BC. So you can see how all of these are just one guy dies, another guy replaces him, the other guy dies, another guy replaces him. And this guy right now fits in historically as one who by his riches, he stirs up all against the realm of Greece. That's Xerxes. So his endeavor was to conquer Europe, and he began with Greece. He actually had several attempts. The second one was by the Persians, and it stopped because the Greeks resisted. He wasn't able to conquer them. The Greeks resisted. You already know how that resistance happened. At any rate, because we've already reviewed how that is ultimately going to happen. So the Greeks stop him. This indicates that this guy came at them with over 100,000 men on land. And they got left behind. That's the historical pages. In verse 4, as we continue, it says, This mighty king is going to arise. He shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he is arisen, verse 4, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his doctrines with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others besides these. So this pertains to whom historically? Do you remember? His first name starts with an A, and he had kind of a fancy little phrase on the backside of his name.
Alexander the Great.
Exactly, Alexander the Great. Yeah. So Daniel's being a little bit more precise in terms of the personalities of the people and the warfare that's going on. But it's Alexander the Great. In verse 4, though, also is his demise. He dies. And then what indicates by the four winds are those who split among his generals. This is important by ultimately the areas that they're going to govern. It's military rule through jurisdiction. Verse 5, we have another set of warring factions on the scene. It might be titled in your Bible, Kings of the North and South. Let's figure out who they are. Also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So this speaks of the king of the north and south. So here's all you need to put down. The south represents Egypt. The south represents Egypt from about 323 to 285 BC. That's the area right now that we're playing with. And then the north represents Syria. And now for a good chunk of the scriptures, here's what you're going to see. Back and forth ping-ponging. Or ferocious volleyballing. Or intense soccer. I mean, basically there's warfare going on. It's who can outdo the other guy in the game of conquest. So the south is Egypt, the north is Syria. One of the names that's going to keep coming up, but changing by Roman numerals, even though it wouldn't apply to them. Ptolemy, that's an Egyptian name. His name is spelled Ptolemy. Ptolemy. And we're not going to probably be deviating from that name, but it's not going to be the same guy. It's just going to be the same name. It's like Caesar, that became a title that retained itself through all of the distinct personalities of the Caesars that would come. Nero being one of the last ones in the fall of Rome. Okay? So when we think of Caesar, most of us go, oh, it was Julius. Man, he's all over the pages of history. Wow, he lived a big life. Well, no, he lived a life. He was killed actually in life, betrayed. And then other Caesars would come to take over his authoritative role. So the same is true here, Ptolemy. So I'll try to make it distinct. But right now, he'll have a run for about up to 285 BC. And then it says this as well, one of his princes shall be stronger. And this name you have heard of, it's Seleucus. Seleucus. He does have a distinct second portion to his name, and it is Nicator. Nicator. He goes strong just a little bit behind Ptolemy. He makes it to 281. 312 to 281. A little bit closer is what I meant to say. Verse 6, let's read it. So at the end of some years, they shall join forces, okay? So the north and south, they're going to ultimately join forces. For the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority. Neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So, man, if you needed to have a decoder, it's on that verse. So I'll do as good as I can to make this make sense. Verse 6 speaks of Ptolemy number 2. 285 to 246 BC. And what this is telling us is he sends his daughter Bernice, or Berenice, but we'll just call her Bernice, Berenice, to marry a guy named Antiochus. But this isn't Antiochus Epiphanes. This is Antiochus Theos. This means Antiochus God. That's better than the illuminated one. Theos means God. So Antiochus God. That sounds good. And he'll be on the scene from 261 to 246 BC. And they are going to form an alliance through Bernice, or Berenice. But Bernice is actually what you'd call an arranged marriage. Don't know the exact age to the Ptolemy that she will ultimately be given to, but he's a younger guy, let's put it that way. He's probably not too far beyond diapers right now. That's the way they did it back then. And so reading verse 7 through 8, let's pick it up. But from a branch of her roots, one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, okay, and deal with them and prevail. Going to deal with you. That's what's happening there. Verse 8. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt. That's what he wanted to do. With their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So this is Ptolemy as he sends his daughter to marry Antiochus Theos to form an alliance. 7 and 8. I'm going to read 8 now too. He's going to carry their gods captive to Egypt with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So this speaks of a Ptolemy, in this case is the third, because this is now the back and forth. He's going to defeat Seleucus. He's going to return to Egypt as what is indicated there with the spoils. And he's going to be able to have, now it would imply this for about 18 years peace between these warring factions. The warring factions again are Egypt and Syria. So for 18 years, at verse 7 through 8, they're going to have peace. They're basically probably tired of killing each other. And Bernice probably is satisfying a covenant pledge right now. You know, women have been used to buffer the warring tendencies of men. No doubt she's being used in that capacity. Verse 9, proceeding on with the history here. The king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. And so this basically is Seleucus now, who's going to go back into combat. He wants to retake his kingdom after 18 years. He's kind of saying, I've been thinking about this. That was kind of a ripoff. So I'm going to do something about it. So he goes and endeavors to have war with Ptolemy, and the bottom line is he fails. Verse 10, however, his son shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress to stir up strife. So this is basically the son who wants to recapture his father's territory for Syria. That's all we're seeing right now. The next generation saying, man, they were bad to my dad. We're going in. And that's what's happening. Verses 11 through 12. The king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude. But the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. Verse 12. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will be cast down, he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. So Ptolemy the fourth right now, he wages war against Syria. So that's Egypt, once again against Syria. And it would indicate right now that at least 10,000 soldiers die in battle, and there's about 4,000 historically that are captured right now. So that's a pretty significant loss and gain. Triumphantly, it would look like a pretty powerful Super Bowl match. In 13 through 14, the war is going to continue because Syria, which is the north, reciprocates to fight against Egypt. That's what we see in 13 to 14. So for the king of the north will return and muster this multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Verse 14 now, in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fail. So that tells us what the outcome is right there. In verse 15, it's going to tell us what Syria ultimately is able to achieve, because right now it was failure. They're going to achieve something. So the king of the north shall come, build, it says, a siege mound. Now that's important because this is one of the early concepts that hadn't necessarily been explored. And to some degree, in Daniel voicing this, he's telling us the science of taking on a very defensible city. But it didn't happen in Babylon, right? Those guys came under a gate in which the river ran. They just blocked the waters off, came under the gate. So this concept is actually a stratagem that's going to be used militarily. This siege mound will be what ultimately Rome will use on several occasions. They'll use it when you guys, if you visit Masada, they'll use that technique in Masada. They surround Masada because after the revolt, the Jewish men, the zealots, take their families, and Masada no longer is being utilized as a place of retreating for Herod. He's been dead so many years. It's becoming too costly to, maintain. So they take their wives and families up there. I think there's an estimation that there might have been 800 Jewish people just wanted to live away from Rome. And Rome says, yeah, that's not going to happen. And so they spent an entire year encamping around Masada and then building literally this triangulated ramp of dirt and stone in which they hold up their battering rams and beat down the door. They couldn't beat it down, so they ultimately torched it and burned it down. They came in, and you'll hear about it, but at that particular time, they came in literally to decimate the survivors, take them prisoners. The night before, the strategy was, we're not going to be taken alive. We're not going to be subjecting ourselves to the slavery of Rome. We'll never go back to Egypt, if you would. So we're going to take our lives. And the history is that they drew lots, and certain men were in charge of the submission of wives and sons and daughters going to execute, and then ultimately fall on their own sword, and then there'd be an execution left to take care of the other 5 remaining. So it's pretty fascinating. But this concept right now of this besiegement is interesting. It seems to be coming right now from this text. So, violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, so the king of the north shall come, build a siege mound, take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand them. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. This has implications about choice troops not being able to resist ultimately the force and politics of Antichrist, but we're not quite there yet. In verse 16, it tells us, but he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. The glorious land is going to imply what? The promised land. So this right now is that Syria is going to control all of basically Israel proper. Everything that God had promised to the Jews, Syria now is going to control from here on out. Why is that important? Because this is when the Antiochus Epiphanes will come on the scene. We're not quite there yet, but he's going to come on the scene as a direct result of the land being now suppressed by Syria. It gives him a way in. So guess what? Politics will lead ultimately the entire global front to be suppressed. In other words, where there will be a turmoil that he can handle, but in terms of there being a unification of the entire global area in economics, it'll already kind of be in place. But there'll be one who will tie up all of the loose ends of the warring factions. In other words, he'll be able to enter into his promised land and to be able to, ultimately, as Antiochus Epiphanes will do, bring it under control, under submission, peacefully. Listen to the guy. He's good. Really good. Wise. Never heard of anything like that. That's how he will influence that. So, something to be mindful of right now. So, the glorious land with, notice this, destruction and his power. They don't see it yet, but he's got it. That's his intent. With the power that he will have, he will bring destruction. Verse 17, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be for him. So 17 is another peace treaty that's forged by bringing a daughter in. And the interesting thing about this daughter is it will have historically similarity to what you know, I think, on a larger scale. But here's what we know of her. This marriage is for the Syrian daughter, Cleopatra, to the Egyptian king, Ptolemy. Not the original one. We're several Ptolemies down the line right now. This Cleopatra is not the Cleopatra. Okay? She has a name that was popular. But this isn't her. That Cleopatra's not on the scene yet. That Cleopatra's going to come on the scene when Rome is at its center strength, right? Under Caesar and Mark Antony. And when Rome actually comes into Egypt and vanquishes it, putting Cleopatra, who was the empress or ruling deity at that time, she'll have this ultimately thing with Caesar, but Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand general, will end up falling in love with her, and it becomes really ugly. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at right now. It's not Cleopatra of Caesar and Mark Antony fame. It's just one of the Syrian daughters. But this is going to be for a peace pact. So after this, he shall turn his face to the coastlands, shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. So Syria right now, with this peace between Egypt through Cleopatra, they're going to attack Asia Minor, they're going to attack Greece, and they're going to attack, their intention is to get back to Egypt, but right now that hasn't happened. But there is an intervention that happens right now, and Rome is going to be the one that intervenes. Says, yeah, we caught wind of this, we're not going to let you do that. So Rome's beginning to come into influence right now, brokering its power right now. And why would they want to do that? Because when anybody else now moves in to take a dominant force, then they're going to use a voice to say, yeah, we're not going to let that happen. Because we're actually thinking about being a dominant force, so you're not going to have any chance of that. That's why we end up going into conflicts with other nations. We point our rockets, our drones. They understand our economics. Right now, it's a good thing that we have the type of power that we do, and that we also have a philosophy that prevails in terms of how we do things. We're actually a very nice nation in terms of even waging war. Probably too nice. It's probably, why our war in Iraq and Afghanistan have gone on for the longest that any war has ever been waged. Close to 17 years now. No war's ever been waged like that in modern times. We've done it. Because we're basically nice people that want to do things decently and have as little effect on hurting the innocent as possible. But those other guys, they use the innocence of people, their people, to put in the way as shields against the way you conduct modern warfare. So there's sinisterness that's going on here. Verse 19, he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. So as Rome intercedes to stop this attack, basically this expansion of Syria, there is this guy, similar name, but not the guy yet. Antiochus is killed trying to rob the temple in Bel of Elam. That's what you're seeing right now in verse 19. This guy's going to be made to stumble and fall, not be found. He was simply trying to get what he could when he was stopped from going any further. Verse 20, there shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, and not in anger or in battle. So on this one, there seems to be a title for Antiochus, so I'm going to give it to you. It's the Great, Antiochus the Great. And what they're referring to here is his assistant, a finance minister, who will come on the scene and take him out. So you want to be careful who you make your finance minister. Husbands and wives, they might take you out. In verse 21, and in his place shall arise a vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably, seize the kingdom by intrigue. And so the politics are now getting a little bit warmer. Why? Because we're beginning to close on the introduction of what will be the Antichrist picture right now. So in this particular case, this is now the rise of Antiochus Epiphanes in verse 21 right now. It's a picture possibly. It's not his control, but it's a picture of perhaps his power brokering. Why is that important? Because Antiochus Epiphanes is the foreshadowing of Antichrist, whose position will be given to us in the closing portions up to verse 45, and that would be at 36, I believe, 37. So Antiochus Epiphanes right now is coming on the scene as the foreshadowing. Verse 21, Antiochus Epiphanes, it's telling us about his personality, and his personality will be likened to that of Antichrist. He comes in peaceably to seize the kingdom by intrigue. Diplomatic schmoozing, charismatic in his nature. He's got the right words to use. He's got the right things to be able to say and make happen. And with the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And so Antiochus right now, Epiphanes, he's going to now take on the Greeks, he's going to take on Egypt, and he's going to take on the Jewish priesthood. That's what he's right now being told in scriptures that is his motivation. Verse 23, after the league is made with him, very interesting, after this agreeability, this league is made with him, which we see in Antichrist disposition, he does a handshake with the Jewish nation, and he commits to them resources and power to rebuild the temple, right? This handshake happens before the 7 years begin, which is the years of tribulation. So we're kind of seeing that. He makes league with them, but he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a smaller number of people. So his whole work is deceptive. Verse 24, he shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. Verse 25, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the kings of the south, with a great army, that's Egypt. And the kings of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Verse 26. Yes, those who eat of the portion of the delicacies of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. Verse 28. And while returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, so he shall do damage and return to his whole land. So he tries to conquer Egypt, which would have been verses 25 through 27. 24, however, tells us how he would have endeavored to do that. And that was by using wealth to bribe people. He can't do it necessarily in politics. He'll try pulling out the money wads and seeing what he can fund. Do you remember that that's the promise that ultimately Antichrist is going to use? Hey, you guys want this build? I noticed you got all your articles of worship ready to go. The Temple Mount, yeah, that is kind of a tough one right now, because one of the things that's in the way is the religion of Islam. But we can do something about that. We can give you a couple more inches on this side, it won't be a problem, and I'll build this whole thing for you. Does that sound good? You guys happy about that? Awesome. And that's the way it'll work. So he's going to basically through 29 through 30 right now being shown as one who will take over Jerusalem. And in verse 29 it says, at the appointed time he shall return to go toward the south, but it shall be not like the former of the latter. For the ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Verse 31, forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Antiochus Epiphanes comes in to desecrate the temple that he had built at about the halfway mark. He says, I'm not happy with the way things are going. So that's basically how he shows that. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. This is when you see the Maccabean revolt. Those guys are going, who is this guy? We're not going to stand for this at all. That's the Maccabean revolt being, if you would prophesy, this resistance. And it was an effective resistance. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and flame by captivity and plundering. So there's warfare right now. During the Maccabean revolt, it was bloody. Innocent people were losing their lives. There's warfare going on. And now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. This indicates a spiritual working, a renewal of what once has been desecrated, and the clothing of culture to be cast off. In other words, to become godly again, as opposed to tolerating godlessness any longer. In verse 35, some of those of understanding shall fall, shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. Then the king shall do according to his own will. 36, he shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. 35 and 36 is the break. Antiochus Epiphanes historically fades from this scene. Antichrist comes into view from 36 over to the close at 45. We'll pick this up and take a break.